incredibly important and robust. We know how, in general, clean the waters of East Hampton are. Being surrounded by the Atlantic Ocean, Gardiner's Bay, and Block Island Sound, these are probably some of the most clean, or the most clean and pristine water bodies in all of New York State. Theoretically, that should translate into incredibly clean water here in East Hampton Sound. One thing overlying that, of course, though, is land use. And, of course, throughout the town of East Hampton, we have some areas that are entirely undeveloped, other areas that have some moderate amount of development, which, of course, will be a factor that may interact with water body flushing to affect water quality, fisheries, and ecosystems and habitats. One of the big things I'll talk about today are phytoplankton, algae. Now, I always ask all my students in my classes, how many people are taking this class because they like algae? No one raises their hand. But they are incredibly important for all of our marine ecosystems. They're the base of the food web, so that the productivity of the entire ecosystem, all the fisheries, depend on what's happening with regard to the algae. They're also producing oxygen, of course. But whether that ecosystem is doing well or not can often depend on the types of algae that are present. So again, they're the base of the food web, supporting all of our fisheries. But there are these things called harmful algal blooms that develop in both marine and freshwater ecosystems that can be harmful to humans or harmful to the ecosystem. Just very quickly, the ones of concern on eastern Long Island include alexandrium. This is a dinoflagellate that makes this compound saxitoxin. It's a neurotoxin. It's 1,000 times the potency of cyanide. And it's also a nitrogen-rich compound. We talk a lot about nitrogen. This is a compound that if the organism gets more nitrogen, it can make more of this toxin. And it can be a serious compound. In Alaska, in the last decade, it has resulted in human deaths. Earlier this year, some dogs died in England from consuming shellfish with that toxin in them. And the organism is widespread throughout Long Island, including East Hampton town waters. And there's been, every year, there are areas that are closed to shellfishing because the toxin levels get too high. The closest area around here has been was Sag Harbor Cove in 2012. And there's been surprises with saxitoxin, for example, the death of hundreds of diamondback terrapin turtles caused by saxitoxin in 2015 in the Riverhead region. Another type of harmful algal bloom we worry about is known as rust tide. This organism is not harmful to humans, but is ichthyotoxic, can kill fish. And we've seen that happen in Southampton town waters. And in East Hampton, I often point to this data set that the Shellfish Hatchery had put together from 2012, where there were lots of scallops in 3 Mile Harbor in 2012, leading up to the summer, and then a very intense rust tide occurred there, and you can see the densities of scallops plummeted. We do know this organism, in addition to killing fish, kills off scallops and oysters. We had the death of 100,000 oysters at the Southampton Marine Lab because of the rust tide last summer. And then the final harmful algae in the marine systems is dinophysis. It makes this compound here known as okadaic acid. It's a gastrointestinal toxin. It does show up in shellfish. This is from Northport on the North Shore of Long Island. It's not currently regulated by the DEC, which is of concern. In this particular year, there were shellfish in open waters that accumulated toxins above the FDA threshold. And it sort of just happened because right now there's not very good monitoring or rules by the DEC for this particular toxin compound. And the organism is widespread across Long Island, again, including in East Hampton town waters. In freshwater bodies, we're concerned with things known as cyanobacteria or blue-green algae. These organisms are very well known for making bioactive compounds. Two of the organisms most common in East Hampton town waters historically has been Microcystis and Anabana that make these toxin compounds, microcystin and anatoxin A. And if you've heard me talk before, the tagline with these compounds is they were first discovered in the middle of the 20th century. And before the organic chemists could come up with real names for them, they called them fast death factor and very fast death factor. Because they really are lethal compounds. In Florida, these compounds there's emerging research showing that they can become airborne. I'm sure you've heard in the news in the last year that the terrible problems they're having in Florida, and that's a concern. This compound's getting into people's nasal passages and their lungs. They're also lethal to dogs, and we had a dog death in Georgia Pond in 2012, confirmed by the New York State Department of Health, which in some ways started this monitoring program. And since that time, there have been dogs that have gotten sick in Fort Pond, Mecox Bay, and other locations as well. And last summer, there were a series of dog deaths in Canada associated with blue-green algae. And it's a serious issue here in Suffolk County. There's more lakes and ponds in Suffolk County than anywhere else in New York State with blue-green algae by twofold. So this is last year's data. There were 50 counties in New York State that had blue-green algae blooms. DEC monitors these very carefully. No county had more than Suffolk County, and the closest counties to us had about half the amount. It's partly because of our latitude. We're the furthest south in New York State. But there are other counties like Nassau County and downstate counties that don't have nearly as many as we do. We have a lot of small lakes and ponds, and they're likely, therefore, vulnerable to these events. The last thing we're looking at are indicator or pathogenic bacteria. These are non-photosynthetic organisms, but the types of bacteria often associated, just being blunt, with feces that lead to either a shellfish bed being closed to shellfishing or at high levels preventing swimming as well. And so just for example, all throughout the town of East Hampton or all throughout New York State and marine waters, there are water bodies that are, DEC has designated every single square acre of every water body as either being open to shellfishing year-round, no problems whatsoever. In the blue, this is an area, just as an example, of course we're looking at Accabonac Harbor here, an area that's seasonally open to shellfishing. And then there are other areas that are in the red that are never open to shellfishing. So we're looking at these levels of indicator, and so to make these declarations, the DEC looks at fecal coliform bacteria as an indicator for these pathogenic bacteria. And we're doing the same. In fact, last year we did a little bit more. I'll talk about the way we've traced where some of these bacteria are coming from. So those are objectives then, to look at overall water quality, but also fecal coliform bacteria, identifying where those bacteria might be coming from, and then looking at the different types of marine and freshwater harmful algal blooms. So we have actually over 20 sites across East Hampton that we're monitoring, both in marine water bodies and freshwater bodies. We generally start our monitoring in the spring, around now, and it continues on into the fall. All of our work is done at the Stony Brook Southampton lab, so the water is being collected and brought there. We're using standardized methods. In the last year, my laboratory has been certified by the State Health Department, so we're now a certified lab for the analysis of fecal coliform bacteria. We're a certified lab for the measurement of nitrogen. To my knowledge, we're the only such academic lab in downstate New York. There's very few labs like that. And actually that elevates the data I'm showing you today, because our data is now legally defensible. And it's on the same playing field as being generated by the state agencies. We had to go through a very rigorous process to do this, but we saw the value in it, so that if there is a question about the data, all the records are there, and the numbers are what the numbers are. This is actually a higher standard than the scientific standard. So for example, I've been publishing papers for 20 years and not being certified as a laboratory. But now not only do we have the scientific rigor, this is more like in the legal realm. We now have that level of certification as well. So to move on to some results, and almost everything I'm going to show is, this is a recap of 2018. So that's almost everything I'm going to show. So if you're seeing data, it's largely what it is, although we now have 6 years of data. So now in many cases we can look back and compare to say, hey, was 2018 very different or anomalous, or is this about what to expect? And so here are our different sites that we're monitoring the marine front, and I'm showing you here just very simply salinity. And actually what this shows, the salinity here is very high. It's usually about 28 to 29. Ocean water is 31. The Pathogenic estuary is going to be around 29, close to 30. So just this alone just tells you that most of these water bodies are flushing fairly well, which is a very good sign. There are other parts of Long Island where the estuarine salinity can get down to 24, 25, and then you know you've got a larger influence of water from land, and that can create even larger problems. These are daytime oxygen levels, again, for all of these different water bodies. I thought I had, but I don't see. I'm not going to go back, but I'll just note, I know there are people who are very interested in Accabonac Harbor and the new culvert that was put in. That's adjacent to Site 7. I don't know why it's not in there, because I had a little yellow box around that. But anyway, as I go through things, you can look carefully at that. That site, in general, showed very good water quality this last year, and perhaps some very minor notable improvements. The daytime oxygen levels, all my data I'm trying to interpret through the lens of state and federal standards, and when those don't exist, maybe international scientific standards. The state standard for oxygen is 3 milligrams per liter. The DEC never wants to see any water body fall below that. In fact, any water body that does fall below that triggers regulatory action. And so during the day, making spot measurements, all the water bodies measure up quite well. With the exception of 3 Mile Harbor, we had actually, but I'm going to show more data on that going forward. Site 11 there is actually within the head of the harbor. Here are levels of chlorophyll. Both the EPA and NOAA never wants to see very high levels of chlorophyll in marine water bodies. They set a standard of 20 micrograms per liter. On average, all of the water bodies match up. You can see there are some occasions, in the orange is the maximal level. There were some occasions, both in Northwest Harbor and 3 Mile Harbor, where there were violations of that standard. That was associated with a specific harmful algal bloom, rust tide. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. And then it just shows the average for 2018 versus prior years. You can see we're making enough observations where these things are starting to match up. And in fact, in some cases, the 2018 was actually lower than average.
Dr. Gobler?
Yes.
Excuse me. Folks, we do have seats available up here, so feel comfortable. You don't have to, but I want you to be comfortable.
Good idea.
All right?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to the indicator bacteria. Levels were generally very low throughout all water bodies that we measured in 2018, with the exception of 3 Mile Harbor. This is specifically within the head of the harbor. We found very high levels there. But otherwise, most other levels were even below, at or below the shellfishing standard, which is the most robust standard that there is. And then comparing 2018 to the long-term average, it was a higher than average year at that location within 3 Mile Harbor. Other places were better than average versus the long-term. So, yeah, leave it at that. Moving into some freshwater bodies, I just talk about Georgica Pond and also Wainscott Pond, looking at fecal coliform bacteria there. And we did find very high levels on several occasions in 2018. I have two different standards up here. The one is for shellfishing, the other is for swimming. So for the multiple locations at the head, the south, and in head of Georgica Pond, Talmadge Creek, the southern part of Georgica Pond and Georgica Cove, going above that standard for the maximum, and also above for the average level. And in general, it was a worse than average year for all the sites within Georgica Pond. So this is a new part of the talk. I've never given this before because it's a new approach. We agreed last year that it would make sense to bring in a new tool to better understand where these fecal coliform bacteria are coming from, right? It's good to know levels are high or low, because then you could say, yes, swim, don't swim, harvest the shellfish, don't harvest the shellfish. But it's very difficult to take managerial action to improve conditions if you don't know where the fecal bacteria are coming from. And obviously, the solution would be very different if it was coming from human waste as opposed to animal waste. And even amongst the animals, that would differ as well. So we used a new approach called digital PCR, and essentially it's doing DNA fingerprinting of the fecal bacteria and figuring out where they're coming from. We had 4 sets of primers for deer, birds, humans, and dogs, and able to quantify that through the season. The Friends of Georgia Capon paid for a study of Georgia Capon, and then within 3 Mile Harbor, that was funded by the trustees.
Dr. Goldberg,
Yeah.
I think we should just point out that the category for dogs includes many other animals.
That's right. That's a good point to bring up now. So I could talk a lot about the specifics of these DNA analyses. All the primer sets are 100% effective of capturing their target DNA. And so this is fairly new scientifically, but it's been around long enough, decade or so, that the primers have been refined and have been tested in other labs around the world, such that if there is dog-based bacteria there, you're definitely going to capture it. But Bill brings up a very important point, and I'm glad he did. There is some cross-reactivity. I would have brought it up anyway, but I'll bring it up now. Specifically the dog primers, I would call them more small mammal primers. We believe there's also cross-react, so it's getting all the dog, but in addition, it's already been shown that they cross-react. You may pick up in that signal cats, potentially some livestock, and likely small rodents as well, which might be a very large signal. But in general, I'll just say in 2017 study of Georgia Capon, it was a very good target for road runoff and correlated very closely with road runoff. So all of these animal-based fecal bacteria coming in via road runoff, and you'll see that worked out again in 2018. For the first time, we were able to compare all of those bacterial groups together against something known as Enterococcus, which is sort of an indicator bacteria. And we found a fairly good correlation between these two bacterial groups, which we felt very good about, because what it means that if there was a major group of bacteria that we were missing, note I'm only putting 4 up there. We chose those 4 on purpose, and I'm sure if we did Family Feud before we did this, those might have been the top 4 answers on the board for everybody here. But of course we could have been missing something. But if we were missing a very major group, we likely would not have gotten this correlation. So we feel that we've selected the best primer sets, and we're likely capturing most of the bacteria, and that since Enterococcus is tracking with these, that the same process, we're also probably likely capturing the processes that are delivering the bacteria as well. Okay, so to get into some data, there's lots of colors here, and I'm going to have to explain what each of them are, because I can see this text is quite small for you all. There's 3 sites for 3 Mile Harbor. I'm going to go through them one at a time. The first site is Gann Road. It's sort of the northeast, near the inlet of 3 Mile Harbor. The blue, the top is quantifying the total numbers. The bottom is the percentage of each group. Blue is for birds. Humans are in the orange. Deer are in the green. And then that small mammal primer is the yellow. And so the easiest thing to look at probably is the lower one. And so what we see that's very interesting, we didn't see in Georgia Capon, and actually did not see for any other sites, on some of the dates, and the dates go from May through into the winter, on some of the dates, there's a large actually human signal. My suspicion, based on the sum of data, and I'll go through more of it now, is that this could be associated with boat discharge and maybe not on-site wastewater systems. Again, as I'm sure we know, there are several marinas in Gann Road, but on 2 dates, the human bacteria made up the majority, and in the others, it was the small mammals. Moving to the head of the harbor, in the back of 3 Mile Harbor, we see a little bit more of a mix. A couple of dates where the deer are a significant contribution, not the largest, but I'll just point that out because we didn't see that in Georgia Capon, and we didn't see that for the other sites. We do see the human signal a little bit. Of course, there's marinas back there as well, but the biggest signal being the small mammal signal. And then finally, the last site here is Hands Creek. This is on the western shore of about midway up 3 Mile Harbor, an area that's because it's a creek, is closed to shellfishing. And there we see just a signal date where there's a bit of a human signal. The rest it's mainly these small mammals, so it looks a lot like what we saw, for example, for Georgica Pond last year. And that, again, seems to track with runoff. And you'll note, I'll also say, note the spikes, and that every time there's a spike, the spike is that yellow color. So again, seems to be indicative of animal waste on roads being, or drains, being washed into water bodies. This seems to be coming up. This came up here. It also came up in Georgica Pond as well. And then this is just on average what we saw over all the observations. Again, the small mammal signal being the largest, Gann Road having the largest human signal, and maybe a little bit more of a mix with some deer in the mix at the other locations. Beyond 3 Mile Harbor, I'll now just show Georgica Pond. We did this last year also. This year was a little bit different in Georgica Pond. Last year we saw it was almost all the dog signal. But what we saw was an interesting progression. I'll put up both sides. This is Talmadge Creek to the north, and this is the main part of Georgica Pond to the south. We saw an interesting seasonal trend where the bird signal got stronger through the season, picked up particularly in the fall. Whereas in the summer months, it was more the road runoff associated potentially with, like I said, dogs and small mammals. So the best explanation that I possibly have for this, of course I didn't know about, Canada geese or Canadian geese migrate out of Canada come the fall. I don't know how many Canadian geese there are on Georgica Pond, but that would be one thing, migratory birds that would count for this signal. You can see it's very clearly changing through the season for both sites. So that's the microbial source tracking aspect there. Just staying on the fecal bacterium, we now have 6 years of data, so we can now look at all the data we've collected for every single location through the years. We can compare the data we're generating and the status of each water body according to the DEC. And we're very conservative in doing this, in that if we ever see a water body, if we ever see a water body that's in any violation of the DEC standards, we just say that, not in violation of the DEC standards, I'm saying that wrong. We're just comparing them. We're conservative in doing so, and essentially what's come up is that there are 3 locations. In general, we can confirm most of the DEC's declarations for every water body. But there are 3 locations where we're seeing cleaner water than the DEC designation has called for. Let me just go through those. So it's Hog Island, Hog Creek, the Isle of Wight site, Hands Creek, and Northwest Creek. So just going through those, I'll first point out that with time, the DEC does change their declaration of shellfishing. So in fact, after our first set of study, we showed that Northwest Creek could be open to shellfishing, and in fact, that change was made. So before this project started, all of Northwest Creek was closed to shellfishing. They then changed it such that the northern half became seasonal. Looking at that further, our data shows that this northern half could probably be open to shellfishing. We've never seen a violation of the fecal coliform bacteria standard. So and again, now we're at 5 years of data for that. Looking at 3 Mile Harbor, the 2 sites, one by Gann Road and the one that had the harbor, our data matches up in general with the DEC. But we do find that the site by Hands Creek, again, we're not seeing violations, yet it's closed. Probably because they worry about the creek and the flushing into the bacteria from there, but according to our numbers, that could be open. And then finally, in Hog Creek, this area that's seasonally open, we're seeing the water there is clean. So this is very simply now an opportunity to perhaps going forward, do a little bit more intense sampling, and open up a conversation, particularly if one of these water bodies has an interest in opening it to shellfishing. Again, most of these cases, there are ones that are seasonal that our findings showing they could be open year-round. But I should emphasize, of course, that I'm not the DEC, and I have nothing to do with those regulations. But I do speak with them, and I think, if there was the desire for a conversation about this, Again, we're now an ELAP certified lab. In the very beginning, when I said these sorts of things, they would come back and say, well, you don't have enough data. But we do now have 5 or 6 years of data, so that could be a starting point for a discussion to figure out what else we might want to do.
Dr. Gobler, we had a meeting today for Aquaponic Protection Committee, of which I'm a member and now the liaison for the trustees, and it was asked if the northern end of Aquaponic Harbor might be a testing place because it's been closed to shellfishing, and that currently the culvert is where you test. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is that something that we can discuss with you?
So we could look closer. I mean, I will just say that since I didn't call that out as one of the 3 sites, that's a site where we have seen high levels on occasion, right? And so, like I said, we're being super conservative, and we're only calling out the sites where, look, this is always clean, right? So that's probably most of the time, that is also good, but we have through the years seen at least one sample that's gone above. But certainly we could look, that's the whole idea of my sampling regime is that it's meant specifically to be flexible and to, with the needs of the trustees. And so certainly if there's a desire to have more sampling in there, get better spatial or temporal resolution, that can be built in.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. To move into the marine harmful algal blooms, starting with Alexandrium, very nasty species. And good news, the levels last year were low. And so, some high levels, but for perspective, you almost need 1,000 cells per liter to have shellfish be toxic, so the organism is present in most water bodies, but thankfully dozens of cells per liter, not hundreds or thousands. And it was a better year than average for many locations. For example, 3 Mile Harbor, again, head of the harbor, has had problems in the past. And so the average last year was lower than the average that has been in 3 Mile Harbor. I will say, though, that the continued monitoring is important in that you can see the dynamics here for 3 Mile Harbor just pulling out 3 early on years, whereas in one of the years we got to 3,000 cells per liter. The DEC was really worried. They had to pull in an emergency monitoring for shellfish. The bloom went away before that could declare anything, and so thankfully it did become a problem, but it just shows that you can, if you compare these 3 years, you can see how dynamic these events can be interannually. With regards to dinophysis, we saw very low levels, in fact, for this particular species. I should mention both these species are sort of spring, early summer. The levels were low for most locations, to the point where I think we could maybe even peel back a little bit the monitoring of this, in that it does, it's there, but we're not seeing it achieve levels that are of concern, thankfully. The story is different, though, for rust tide. This has been a problem in East Hampton waters through the years, and 2018 was a problem again. I have the number of 300 cells per liter there, because we know that's a level that can be lethal to fish. And so what was a little bit different in 2018 is we saw the highest levels actually in Northwest Creek. That's never happened before. Oftentimes the peak is in 3 Mile Harbor. We also had high levels in Hog Creek and low levels in Aquaponic Harbor, whereas in past years we've seen this organism be dominant or at the highest densities in Aquaponic Harbor. So this is definitely a species where its dynamic seems to change over time. And you can see that, again, this past year was much lower than average for 3 Mile Harbor, much higher than average for Northwest Creek. But again, this is an organism that's dangerous for both fish and shellfish. It's the one that caused the oyster mortalities for us in Southampton last summer. Just want to focus for a moment on 3 Mile Harbor. During those rust tide blooms is when we had the violations of chlorophyll standard there on 3 different dates through the summer. We also have been monitoring oxygen instead of just once during the day, every week or every 2 weeks. We've put in a continuous monitoring device to capture day-night variability. And what we see there is 1, tremendous day-night variability, and 2, that last summer for almost the entire month of August, going way into the fall, low DO almost every night. Now, what's ironic is that during the day, the levels are almost supersaturated. So you're getting high levels of photosynthesis by day, but you're getting down to, in some cases, almost zero at night. And that's a concern, because with these kinds of fluctuations, this is not going to be a habitat that's going to be conducive for shellfish or fish. And so obviously it's an area of concern. Just to show a little bit more data about this area, I've talked about this before, but I think it's worth mentioning again. This is data from Suffolk County, and showing the predicted nitrogen levels in groundwater based on land use, and you can see all this red here. And so due to the density of homes in this area, you can see all the high nitrate. This is more than 10 milligrams per liter. That's a level of nitrate in groundwater you really can't, the EPA would tell you can't drink that water. And it's a very high level that's then flowing into this head of the harbor region, likely promoting a lot of the water quality impairment. We've done in the past, collaborated with the Nature Conservancy, looked at the nitrogen loading and where it's coming from. 2/3 of the nitrogen coming into 3 Mile Harbor is from wastewater, and from all those homes. And we found that in general there are correlations between the nitrogen loading rates and the amount of chlorophyll in the water, and also the amount of nitrogen from wastewater. So those algal blooms can be tied directly back to that loading of wastewater. The good news is that that whole area with high nitrate has a very rapid groundwater travel time, 2 years, and even if you peel back from there, that's in the red, the orange and yellow, that's 10, going up to 25 years travel time. But, so the good news is that actions taken now, particularly in the red region, to mitigate nitrogen loading could show results in just 2 years' time. So the point being that wastewater's got to be addressed in this area. The nitrate levels are super high. It's mainly from wastewater, but if action is taken, it should have rapid.
Dr. Gobler, quick question. I'm just thinking, the harbor is surrounded by the red, which is high nitrogen.
No, in this plot, this is groundwater travel time.
Okay.
So but you're
The
right,
other-
it's
the other
also
diagram.
surrounded by high nitrogen.
And I'm concerned that the wells, which most of us have in the Northwest Woods, that these residences are using wells for their water supply.
So everybody should have their water tested, I think everybody, particularly in this day and age and in East Hampton, anybody with a private well really needs to have it tested all the time, I would say yearly, for nitrate, in this case.
Right.
And obviously for things like perfluorinated compounds as well. But when you have an area with high density of housing, and therefore of septic tanks, that's how you get compromised drinking water. That then, and of course what we don't drink enters our harbors. So.
Just want to bring that up to the Northwest.
Just a quick note now and a quick follow-on with regards to wastewater. I'll move through this very quickly, but in good news, the county is allowing alternative septic systems to be installed. They've approved 5 different systems, and I had a meeting with these folks just recently. They're approving a few more as well, and they're testing many others. At Stony Brook, we're also creating some systems that we are performing quite well. We call them nitrogen-reducing biofilters to remove nitrogen from wastewater. These are essentially what are known as drain fields, which most of the country uses for disposing on-site wastewater. And underneath those drain fields, layers of sand mixed with wood chips, which transforms the nitrogen into a form that can be turned into gas and sent back to the atmosphere. 80% of our atmosphere is nitrogen gas, so you're getting the nitrogen, therefore, out of our groundwater and back into the atmosphere where it would be harmless. So we've created 3 versions of these systems, one with a liner at the bottom, to retain the wastewater to maximize efficiency of that denitrification, the nitrogen removal. One without a liner, that is probably a little less efficient, but easier to install. And one with what's known as a wood chip box, that has the sand layer, or sand filter, that sends the wastewater directly to a box filled with wood chips that carries out that denitrification process. And the box is at the surface, so the whole system is very shallow profile, less than 2 feet. And the wood chips can be replaced as needed.
And what's a typical, like, how long does that last?
So what I didn't say is the center has a goal of what we call 10-10-30. We want to get less than 10 milligrams per liter nitrogen effluent. We want the system to cost less than $10,000. We want the system to last at least 30 years. And so based on both observations, the scientific literature, and calculations, these wood chips should last much longer than 30 years.
Okay, so you're not changing the wood chips, it's not like changing the charcoal in your
Correct.
fish tank.
That's right, because literally, so long as they're physically there, they're still releasing
They're
the
still
carbon,
reactive.
and it's the carbon that they're releasing that is the fuel for the microbes that remove the nitrogen. So we've installed some of these systems across Suffolk County as part of Suffolk County's piloting program, and I'll just point out the systems, we put in 3 of these online systems. The effluent from these is averaging 7 milligrams per liter. The county standard is 19, so it's much better than the county standard. We have 1 line system in with data in so far that's doing even better at 5 milligrams per liter. And of all the systems that have been tested, ours are actually producing the cleanest effluent when it comes to nitrogen. And beyond removing nitrogen, these systems also remove organic contaminants, personal care products. So it's a list of them here, but these are pharmaceuticals, drugs, nicotine, caffeine, DEET, achieving greater than 90% removal for all of these compounds, some cases 99%. That's better than a sewage treatment plant does. So not only are we cleaning the water of the nitrogen, but we can imagine that in wastewater there's lots of other things we don't want as well, so these systems do a good job of removing those. These systems are in the experimental phase right now. They'll move to the piloting phase next year, and these will be approved by the county, as long as everything goes well, by the year 2021. Okay, so that was just a sidebar about addressing nitrogen loading, with 3 Mile Harbor being the clearest case of where nitrogen loading needs to be resolved. Moving in the freshwater, blue-green algae. This is not part of this study, but I just want to point out that last year, with a collaboration with the Friends, Concerned Citizens of Montauk, we began monitoring Fort Pond in Montauk for blue-green algae. They had problems before, and they want to make sure that the Mighty Montauk triathlon occurs. But actually, and this water body was clean through most of the summer, but an event, a blue-green algae bloom event, came up through the month of September. We upped our testing to many times a week to try to prevent, to not prevent the blue-green algae, but see if it would go away in time, and it didn't. And so both the state health department and the county health department declared that they could not have the swimming event in Fort Pond for the 2nd consecutive year. Looking across the freshwater bodies that we monitored in 2018, we had 3 sites in Georgia Pond, Hook Pond, and also Wainscott Pond. You can see the most intense blooms that occurred was in Wainscott Pond, both on average, but also as a maximum level. But we also had a moderate event occur in Georgia Cove late in the season, that is through the month of September, although the levels cleared out by October. I'll point out, I think some of us here know everything about there is to know about the harvester in Georgia Pond. This was instituted in 2016. We got DEC permits to do this. It was specifically designed because what was observed in 2013, 14, and 15 was very poor water quality, and a series of events whereby, if you can see this photo here, the pond became blanketed with macroalgae, specifically something known as Cladiophora, during the summer, specifically June and July. That's promoted by excessive nitrogen loading. We proved that in a study supported by the Friends of Georgia Pond. But that at high temperatures later in the summer, this bloom would collapse, and that bloom would release nutrients that then would lead to a blue-green algae bloom that was very intense and toxic. And therefore, the idea was to bring in the harvester during the summer to cut off the macroalgae, remove the macroalgae, prevent the nutrients from being released, and therefore hopefully prevent the blue-green algae bloom. I'm not going to go through all the data, but this is a summary of how things changed with and without the harvester. That is the years without the harvester. We had very intense blue-green algae blooms and summertime anoxic conditions or very low oxygen conditions. We instituted the harvester in 2016, and the 3 years since then, we didn't eradicate the blue-green algae, but the levels were almost an order of magnitude lower than before. And the oxygen levels during the summer, we never had hypoxia, much higher levels. So the harvester seemed to work. We're revisiting what we're going to do with the harvester in this coming year. I'm not going to get into the details now, but clearly, statistically even, I don't even have to convince you, you don't need to look at this, but statistics would tell us, with the statistical analyses, that we're getting better water quality. We had better water quality with the harvester than without. Just back to the auction, we have a buoy in there, again supported by the Friends of Georgia Pond. This is what the auction looked like in 2015. Looked a lot like what I just showed you for 3 Mile Harbor. Much of the summer, the levels get very low, anoxic at times, high during the day, but at night going anoxic. We also had fish kills and other sorts of animal deaths in Georgia Pond during this 2015 event. 2018 is what it's looked like when we've had the harvester in the last 3 years. You can see hardly any excursions whatsoever, certainly none through the summer. There is an excursion, however, following the opening of the cut. And so just to, as you know, the cut gets open every fall, it gets lead, water levels get very high, salinity gets very low. And so this plot, just to go through what happens, we've seen this every year. Last year seemed to be a little bit more intense with regards to the, the oxygen. So here's what happens. The cut being opened slightly after October 23rd, if my date is correct. You can see the salinity jumping from 4 parts per thousand up to more than 25. Of course, that's the ocean water rushing in. It takes, and you can see, you can even almost pick out the tidal cycle. So pond first lets out, and then on a high tide, you'll get some marine water coming in, and then tidal motion starts to take over. But what's interesting, we saw last year and previous years, the oxygen levels fall during that time period. Even during the day, the oxygen levels are low, and then they pop back up. Last year, it seemed to be an innocuous occurrence. That is, there were no deaths of marine life, but we actually had a small fish kill in 2017 with the opening of the cut. We don't fully understand what's driving this. We do know that in addition to the pond letting out, all the groundwater around the pond also starts to let out at the same time. So it may well be there's some wastewater from septic tanks that's getting in also, but it happens all at once. It could also be a function of where the oxygen sensor is. We need to learn a little bit more, but this didn't surprise us, but I'm just sharing the data with you so you're aware. The last water project I was here about is Wainscott Pond. The Wainscott Pond project was initiated recently, and this is what, I should have kept the other one up there. It's a beautiful water body, but there was a bloom of macroalgae there last July that then, just like Georgia Pond, turned into a blue-green algae bloom. It was intense, but short-lived. It pretty much went through the month of July into August, and then cleared up. We had a buoy in Wainscott Pond as well to do continuous monitoring. So what you can see here is there's the onset of that event. Again, it was for most of the month of July, maybe a small secondary event that occurred in the fall. And again, these blue-green algae are of a concern for human health, but they also are an ecosystem concern as well. You can see it's with the collapse of the blue-green algae bloom that those oxygen levels start getting into the danger zone. So these, and we saw the same thing in Georgia Pond. These blue-green algae, not only are they harmful to potentially humans, marine, aquatic life, pets, but they also have the ecosystem effect of drawing down oxygen levels. As part of the study last year, we looked at the nitrogen loading rates into Wainscott Pond. I'll say that we were able to prove that blue-green algae are being promoted by nitrogen and phosphorus. I'm just showing the nitrogen here. The phosphorus came primarily from sediments. You can see the nitrogen is more mixed. And so there was nitrogen coming from fertilizer, but similar amounts from sediments, also large amounts from wastewater. So with all the data we had a series of remediation actions that are being considered that goes after these different sorts of nutrient sources. So removing muds, potentially putting in what is known as a permeable reactive barrier to intercept groundwater, removing and potentially filtering the water, both for microalgae and macroalgae as well. I won't go too much into the data. Again, we have a lot of information about the sediments there. There's a lot of muds in there. It's a strong nutrient source, and that's why removing those will be important. It's 70% of the phosphorus load, 20% of the nitrogen load, 24% of the nitrogen load. And the permeable reactive barrier, the idea there is that since a lot of the nitrogen comes in from agriculture, this kind of barrier could be intercepting the groundwater nitrogen or the groundwater as it's flowing into the pond, and just like our nitrogen-reducing biofilters for wastewater denitrify because they're built with wood chips that provide the carbon source. This permeable reactive barrier is also built with wood chips and is meant to denitrify the groundwater as it travels through before it gets into the pond. So those are my major points then. I'm done. So in many locations, the water quality was excellent with regards to daytime oxygen and chlorophyll levels, generally supportive of fisheries. In many cases, the harmful algal bloom levels were low. We did see some areas where the fecal coliform bacteria were high, but again, in many cases, they lined up, with 3 exceptions, lined up with DEC standards. I see I lost my one bullet point, and that was the sources of the bacteria and the fact that it looks like the small mammal signal is the largest for most of the locations, but again, we saw potentially a migratory or just general bird signal come up later in the season in Georgia Pond. 3 Mile Harbor has low oxygen at night. It's poorly flushed. It has the most intense harmful algal blooms, historically at least, and most of that nitrogen there is coming from wastewater. And then the last point, Georgia Pond, actually the water quality is better in the last 3 years with the harvester, and we're moving forward on mitigation opportunities within Wainscott Pond. So with that, I would like to sincerely thank the trustees for the foresight with this ongoing monitoring, that we learn a lot from year to year, and it can guide management actions that the town can take. And I'll also say, I'm sure you know this, but when seeking funding, either from the town or from the county or for the state, the projects that get supported for remedial efforts are the ones that have good scientific data, right? So that is the idea that if you just say, well, there's a lot of runoff, we'd like to clean it up, you know, that sort of proposal doesn't hold the same weight as a study that says, we've done the experiments, we know that the cause of algal blooms is nitrogen, we've looked at where the nitrogen's coming from, we know it's from wastewater, we've looked at the groundwater travel times, we know what those are, and therefore we want to address this particular area in this particular way because that's what the data guides us to do. So there's a lot of value in being able, with this sort of data, you're no longer necessarily stumbling around looking for what's happening. We have a good sense of what's happening in a lot of these water bodies. So the data set has a lot of value on many levels. I would call out the Friends of Georgia Pond for supporting the in-depth study there, and also the efforts in Wainscott Pond for the enhanced monitoring there as well, and people in my laboratory also. So I thank you for your attention, and we have time for questions. I'd be happy to answer any.
I have one. Dr. Goldberg, you presented max levels of certain information, particularly in Site 11 in 3 Mile Harbor and later on in Northwest Creek. Are those max levels established by a one-time event, or is that a particular subset of data?
Is the coliform bacteria you're speaking of?
Well, just max levels in general. You're presenting max levels. I just use those two
Yeah,
examples.
well, I mean, it really depends what you're looking at. So it's, for example, with the fecal coliform bacteria, they'll often have 2 standards. They'll have a maximum standard, and they'll have an average standard. So we put up, comparing the data to both of those things. And, in the report, I explain how they match up with regards to both. So, but, there is, at least in the fecal coliform bacteria, that is how the DEC looks at things. They have both a maximal standard and an average standard. And certainly with the harmful algal blooms, you only need a one-time event for those to cause problems, either ecosystem or human or animal health
But
related.
your charts are showing max levels as a charted bar. Is that?
Oftentimes, but I also have the average in there as well.
Right, so
Yeah.
how are you getting to the max level?
That's a single observation.
It is a single.
Yeah, so it's a
Thank
single
you.
observation on a single day. Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes.
Dr. Goldberg, I was really interested in the information of the fecal coliform bacteria. Is there any reference to raccoons being part of that issue as well? I know the water bodies are thick with raccoons because it's a great food source for them.
Sure.
Particularly locally. And I also know, because I deal with them in my business, that their poop is quite bad. With Bailey's Ascaris procyonis, I wonder if that's something of a consideration. Is that parasite something of concern? Is that something that could be of concern? It's quite dangerous
Right,
if
so-
ingested, so.
Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is, there's multiple types of bacteria like that one, and even viruses associated with animal feces. And so the fecal coliform bacteria assay is meant to, as what they call it, it's called an indicator assay. So when you do it, you're taking the water and you're incubating it. Essentially, you're trying to mimic the conditions of the human gut, such that if you were to consume that water, what might grow in your gut? And so it's sort of a catch-all. And so that bacteria you're citing there would come up in that assay, as would other things like Enterococcus. All the others escape me right now, but
And also foxes.
What I found interesting was the levels, because in the summertime, when it was more birds than mammals, to me, that would indicate.
it was transitioning into the fall and winter. It became birds. So in the summer, specifically for Georgia capon, it was more the small mammals.
During the summer?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, then that kind of reverses my thought process, because I know that during the summer, because of all the available, the bigger human population and more human food waste being left out, I know the raccoons kind of come inland from around the water bodies,
Yeah.
searching for food. And then, of course, at the end of the season, when that source ends, they go back to the water bodies in search of food. So I would be interested, and I'm gonna keep up with your.
Yeah. I mean, there may be ways
statistics.
of teasing out raccoons as well. We keep an eye on the literature, and sometimes there are what they call these DNA primer sets that become even more specific. So it's something we could look into.
Well, like rodents, they poop a lot.
Yes.
So.
And there's a lot of them.
So there's a lot of them. So I would imagine that would be a major part of that part of what you're studying.
Yeah.
I find it.
Opossums, foxes, all those little.
Yeah.
John.
Chris, when you talked about your fecal coliform readings possibly conflicting a little bit with the DEC readings, and you thought that maybe some areas were a little bit cleaner than DEC records indicate, I'm wondering, how coordinated are your station locations with their station locations, and your frequency of sampling with their frequency of sampling?
So theoretically, they would have more stations and more frequent sampling. But I will say that we're right in the heart of all these closed regions. And I also don't have a perfect sense of their precise sampling, the temporal and spatial variability of their sampling in these exact locations. But it's something we can get. And if there's, again, a particular water body of interest, we can start looking. But again, because of the number of samples we've collected through the years, the data sets, as far as numbers go, we're now in the realm of being comparable, certainly. But it's certainly something, that could be something we could do as a follow-up, is get that DEC data. Because what I'll say is that it may well be that our data sets are exactly the same, right? Because they don't necessarily update, they're not updating every water body every season.
I think what the DEC does, they have a rolling set of data.
Yeah.
As the new data comes in, they throw some of the old off, so there can be a lag,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, I spoke to them today, and that you can foil their
Yeah,
data.
and I have done that before for other projects, so we could do that for these 3 locations. In fact, I think that'd be a good idea
So
for,
I'd like to do that for the northern part of Accabonac.
Sure.
There's this question of the culvert, it's
Yeah.
affecting this, has come up, and I think that data may be helpful to tease out
yeah.
what went on before, what went on during, and after the
Yeah.
culvert.
It's a good idea. I'm gonna make a note.
I think it's good that all this cumulative data is starting to give us an idea of what's going on. I mean, I personally think we should expand it a little more every year.
I concur. Am I mistaken, Dr. Goldberg, that the Northwest Creek at one point I wrote could be open to shell fishing, but then you had data that presented that the Northwest Creek was not in good shape?
So,
So I'm a
it's
little-
important to not,
Because we'll be
I
doing.
understand what you're saying. So the rust tide hit high levels in this last year, right? So that's the bad part. On the upside, that has absolutely no effect on human health.
Okay.
And so what my data shows is the fecal coliform bacteria levels are low in that area. It did have an anomalous red tide this year, but again, that's not a human health concern.
How would the red tide affect horseshoe crabs? You-
Rust tide.
Rust tide, rather.
They probably wouldn't like it.
Because we will be entering into a program with Cornell
Yeah.
Extension on the horseshoe crab survey. We did it last year, and this
Okay.
year we're going to do it again, and we've actually have more people involved, so we'll be able to spread out in other areas. But Northwest Creek is where John and I were doing the survey last year. So I'm wondering, could that be the reason that a neighbor in Northwest Creek, I think, Rick, it was your neighbor, Tom, who came to us originally, said that he had seen fewer horseshoe crabs in recent years, and that's how this all started. So I'm wondering if that, the rust tide would have an impact on the horseshoe crabs in a deleterious way.
And there's nothing about that in the literature, but we do know just in general that the marine animals that can get out do get out when rust tide moves in. So for example, fish, if a rust tide comes into a particular water body, the fish just move out. We've seen that that pattern has repeated itself through the years. I'm not really, I can't speak to what the horseshoe crabs, how they're responding.
All right. Well, it's something to look into, so
Yeah,
it's
sure.
interesting. Thank you.
Rick?
We have 2 remediation projects going on in freshwater bodies here in East Hampton Town. If we were to put together the framework for a marine remediation project, such as in 3 Mile Harbor or the north end of Accabonac Harbor, is that something that you or your team would have the bandwidth to participate in?
Sure. I mean, it kind of depends on what approach you're looking to take, but, I think thinking about both those regions, well, depends what you want to address and how you want to address it, but certainly whether it's wastewater or bivalves or habitat restoration, it's certainly things that people I'm working with at Stony Brook are all actively engaged in, so be happy to talk to you more about that for sure.
Thank you.
Anyone else on the board? Is there anyone in the audience who may have a question? Okay.
Thank you so very
Well,
much.
thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on to the public hearing tonight. First, I want to welcome everybody for coming. Why don't we start by introducing the board members? We'll start with you.
John Aldred?
We're introducing ourselves with
Susan Borkle.
Rick Drew?
Jim Grimes.
Francis Bach,
Bill Taylor?
Brian Burns?
Susan McGraw-Keever.
Okay, okay, so we noticed this public hearing. I'd like to read that notice. Notice of public hearing on the proposed amendments to the Lazy Point annual lot leases and proposed amendments to the rules and regulations for Lazy Point leases. Legal notice is hereby given that pursuant to Section 20 of the Municipal Home Rule Law of the State of New York and pursuant to a resolution of the East Hampton Town Trustees adopted March 11th, 2019, the said East Hampton Town Trustees will hold a public hearing at East Hampton Town Hall, 159 Panago Road, East Hampton, New York, 11937, on the 8th day of April, 2019 at 6:30 p.m. to hear all interested parties and residents regarding the proposed amendments, the principal intent of which is to extend the lease term from an annual basis to a 35-year lease term. This public notice is also given pursuant to Section 11B of the Rules and Regulations for Lazy Point lot leases, requiring notice of intent to amend the terms of the Lazy Point annual lot lease be given 30 days prior to the April 29th, 2019 expiration of the lease term and pursuant to Section X1 at 11, I believe, A, of the Rules and Regulations of the Lazy Point lot leases, requiring 30 days notice of intent to amend these rules and regulations for Lazy Point leases. Persons testifying are also encouraged to submit written copies of their testimony in person to the East Hampton Town Trustee Office or by mail at P.O. Box 7073, Amagansett, New York 11930, or by email at info@trustees.easthamptonny.gov. Further information, including access to a copy of the proposed amendments to these documents, may be obtained at the East Hampton Town Trustee Office, 267 Bluff Road, Amagansett. Okay, so, I think I'm gonna pass this over for a brief history of how this came about to Jim Grimes.
All right. My name is Jim Grimes. I'm deputy clerk for the trustees, and one of the committees that I chair is the Lazy Point Committee. This goes back, this didn't start yesterday. This actually goes back almost 4 years ago. The Lazy Point community found themselves in somewhat of a crisis with their relationship with the trustees in terms of how they were going to compensate our community as the rents and stuff down there in the Lazy Point. Now, the trustees own the land. We've been leasing the land for about 70 years now to people living down there. Some of the people have been down there quite a while. One of the things that's come up over the last several years is how the sort of the demographic of the community has changed over time, and how every time a property comes up for sale, it's immediately gobbled up by a person who is a resident. That's a requirement. But it's a resident that has the cash to put down on a property that may or may not be waterfront, okay? And at the same time, you either have to have the cash or you have to have an asset that you can leverage. And what that has kind of blocked out of this whole equation is a lot of the people that live and work here. But what it's also done is it's impacted the present community as a whole. A lot of the people down there are in the latter part of their lives. They may want to upgrade their properties, either in advance of trying to turn them over to some relatives or just to live there themselves. One of the things that the annual leases has never provided the tenancy in Lazy Point is any form of equity that they could take to a lending institution and secure some kind of financing on. This 35-year lease extension, which we're proposing here tonight, is to try and mitigate that somewhat, okay? To give the people of the community the opportunity, if they choose to try and secure financing. But second to that, also to secure the relationship with our tenancy over a longer period of time. There was never probably any good reasons to go from year to year with these leases. I'm a landlord in my own business. That doesn't create a good dynamic with your tenants if they're just living on an annual basis with you. You know, a goal of any landlord, and the trustees are landlords here. Our role here is as stewards of the land, and this Lazy Point community has long been a significant source of our revenues, and we recognize that. If our tenancy is comfortable and feels safe and secure, we and our revenue stream will manage to be safe and secure, and that was the point of this. Thank you.
All right. All right, we've put together a few rules for this public hearing. I'm going to ask our attorney, Chris, to read them.
Good evening. Chris Carrillo, counsel for the East Hampton Trustees. I want to quickly go over the procedures for the public hearing. First, there is a sign-up sheet up front. If you have not done so already, please sign up. The clerk is going to call the witnesses the way they're signed up, first come, first serve on the sign-in sheet. When you're called up, we ask you please state your name and any affiliation you might have for the record. We ask you please speak clearly into the microphone and to please stay on topic. Please address the board and try not to address or engage other members of the public. Members of the board may ask questions to you to clarify any facts or opinions. The members are not encouraged to ask any questions of those who are testifying. Please let the witnesses testify. We value the public's input. Given the strong turnout tonight, we do ask that you limit your testimony to around 3 minutes. Once all the names have been called, the trustees will decide whether there's time permitting, which to call up any others who may wish to speak, and they may raise their hand and be called upon, time permitting. Whether you speak or not tonight, we do encourage everyone to submit written testimony for the record. That's all we have for now. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm going to turn it back over to Francis, who's going to begin reading names from the list.
Okay, is there anybody else who wants to sign up to speak before I get started? Okay. I start with David Sealer.
While David's making his way up here, I just want to comment with regards to the time. He's representing the majority of the people here, so he should be giving some additional time if needed, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's fine. That's up to the trustees to decide.
Okay, let's see how it goes. Thank you.
My name is David Sealer, and I'm president of our association. I think that the facts of the presentation have already been made. We hope to have the security of a long-term lease so that people feel comfortable with doing improvements on their property. We have actually maintained a lot of the property for the trustees. We've installed snow fence, we've planted beach grass, and we've cleaned up the beaches, not only our own beach, but also all the access roads, practically to Montauk Highway. So it's a concern of ours to preserve this beautiful asset that the town has, that the trustees really have. I do want to thank the trustees for the amount of time that they've put into this. It's a situation that affects many people, and I hope that you will proceed and allow us for this long-term lease.
Okay, Reg Cornelia?
David?
No.
My name is Reg Cornelia. I used to live in Lazy Point, not in the trustee section, but in the private land, so I have a very warm spot in my heart for that place. And in fact, the first sign I saw when I came to this town said, Promised Land, Lazy Point. I drove right out there. I said, that sounds pretty good, and it was. So my concern is that I'm not clear, having been in the real estate business over 20 years, is this lease rollover, if I sell the property in the 20th year, does the new tenant get a 15-year lease or
It's
another
30.
35-year lease?
Okay, anytime the property gets transferred, whether it's you sell it whether you transfer it to one of your heirs, it instigates another 35 years.
It does do that.
Yes, because you know what? This is the deal. If, let's say, you have a 35-year lease, you've done some financing on the property, let's say for 10 years or 15 years, and now you're at that last 5 years of your lease. Does the value of that product reduce
No,
as a
the value
result
goes
of
down.
it? By tripping and starting another 5-year lease, there's no compromising of the
That was my main
values.
point of concern, because, you know, I was in the real estate business. If I sold a business that had a 20-year lease and I sold it in the 10th year, then I'm only selling a 10-year lease, and that's obviously less valuable than a 20. So that's good, because I think the goal is to do the best by the tenants out there, the residents out there. And I know that it was a big plus when we went from a lottery system, where a waterfront property would sell for $40,000, to a system where it's a market. And this helps clarify the market realities. You now have, plus it's less of a bureaucratic headache, I'm sure, for the trustees to renew leases 35 years rather than every year. The other thing, though, I think, is that the rents will still be very low. And I think it will, over 35 years, the rent will roughly, or slightly more than double. I think it will go from 1,700 to 4,000 or something around. That's not a lot of money 35 years from now, probably. I would like to see some kind of program where the trustees get more out of it. You're a landlord, you're being generous to people who live on your property. I think that the fee, right now it's 4% when you sell a property.
That's 2% paid by the seller, 2% paid by the buyer.
Oh, it's too, well, I think that.
Reg,
Yeah.
just back up from the mic a little bit.
Oh,
That's
okay.
what they're telling me. Yeah, you're good, right there.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right.
That's all right.
You think I know by now? I think that maybe the trustees could get a higher share of that, because the trustees are gonna need more and more money as time goes on. The dredging, which, I don't know if Mike Havens is here, he wants to talk about the dredging in Accabonac and Napeag has been insufficient. I'll be kind. Litigation costs a ton of money if you guys get involved in a lawsuit. So I think revenue to the trustees should be a consideration, so that maybe instead of 2% from, at 4% total at the sale, you make it a 6%, somewhere between 6 and 10. That way, a sale of $1 million property or a $2 million property, who knows what the values will be when you have a 35-year lease to sell and a waterfront property. That'll be a substantial amount of income for the trustees.
Okay, it would, Reg, but how do we, I'm gonna be honest with you. That was part of the crisis 4 years ago, okay? Somebody had a brilliant idea that they would raise the rent from roughly $1,500 a month, I think at the time, or $1,500 a year, excuse me, at the time, to $1,500 a month, okay? These people pay taxes, okay? And how do you reconcile that 6% that you're talking about to a possible buyer that's a working guy that's gonna secure financing or whatever here? You know, I think one of the unique things and one of the positive things is the fact that we've worked really hard to have a good relationship with our tenants. And you know, one of the things that kind of sours our local community is that feeling that everybody has to maximize their revenues from a particular piece of property, whether you're leasing it, whether you're selling it, whatever, okay? We lament how expensive all of our real estate has become, but you know, the hard facts is that's something that's being promoted on a regular basis, and what it's doing is it's pushing some of the other people aside. First and foremost, when we're talking about what we're providing to the people down there, we're providing them a little plot of land, which they own the structure on, that they're charged with maintaining that structure, keeping the neighborhood cleaned up, and they've done a pretty good job of it. And you know what? Personally, I'm pretty satisfied with how the trustees have gotten compensated for that. I would be very reluctant to do anything that would really kind of overstep that limit. I've watched other landlords do this with properties, and you know what? There's nothing more expensive than vacant real estate, okay, if you're in the rental business.
30 seconds,
Jimmy's,
Reg.
does Jimmy's time count towards my time?
No, no.
Actually,
God,
it does.
That's not fair. I had hoped some of these questions would be, of my questions would be answered in your presentation. So, Jimmy, when they, and I was in the real estate business for over 20 years, when they put in the 2% tax on homes over, I forget the amount, and real land and houses, everybody said, oh boy, that'll kill, it didn't kill business. People who want that kind of property are going to go there. You've created a kind of an exclusive community with the first step, which was to go from a lottery system to market price. Now I think you're doing the right thing. You're giving these residents an even better situation. They have stability now. They have 35 years, not only of their own, but to sell to the new buyer. I just, I don't know, have you looked into how this will affect, first of all, will the banks do this? And second of all, will the town now assess these property? Right now, the real estate taxes are low. Will the town raise the assessments based on an increased value of the property because of the lease? I don't know if you've looked into that. I think there's things that have to be worked out, and I would like to still see a little more on behalf of the trustees, because the rents will still be very low, and the trustees in the modern world need a lot more money than they used to because of dredging and real estate. So,
I don't
Thank
think-
you, Reg. Thank you.
I just want to say, as a real estate broker myself for 25 years, Reg, I don't think that it's legal for the town to come in and assess properties because they have a 35-year lease. I mean, that,
I don't know the answer.
you know,
Okay.
so.
Okay, next on the list, Mary Krogan.
Hi, Mary.
Hi all. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mary Krogan, 276 Shore Road, Lazy Point. I actually occupy the house that was the one that broke the lottery system. The Courtneys owned it at the time, and they had to move because of an issue with their child. And I think they petitioned the trustees at that time because they'd put a lot of money into it. And that's how I think that was the initial house that's where it went market value. At any rate, I have occupied this dwelling since 1993, and I'm here just to give a little shout out to the real-world situation I ran into after Superstorm Sandy, but it was really the northeaster a few days later that took a heavy whack at my house. And the FEMA guys came and evaluated and assessed that I was entitled to X amount of money from the SBA that was underwriting the FEMA loans. Well, I had a year-to-year lease, and the FEMA people, said that wouldn't be a problem, but it was a problem. And at the time, I did contact the clerk and also the then attorney of the Board of Trustees to ask if they would talk to the loan officer so that I could get the money to fix the house. And the bank, it just wasn't going to happen for this very reason. And obviously, I ultimately got everything squared away at a tremendous amount of stress and difficulty. So just to, for the pragmatic reason. The other thing, just to address the lot lease fees, hardly anybody has one lot. I mean, it was kind of I don't know who drew those lines, but I'm a lot and a half. So whatever the fee is, it's, that plus on the leases. Nobody's paying, anybody I know is not paying a lease fee for one lot. I think they're a bit of a hopscotch, the way they're put together. A little nervous, kind of scary. I was thinking, look, what's the worst case? They're not going to rescind our lease. I mean, I've been there getting a lease year to year since '93, and most of the people that are in the neighborhood were there when I got there. So it's very long-term residency. And so the worst case is we just get a one-year lease. But it would be really, in terms of opening it up to some other people, that's the only way to do it. I came in at a time when the guy I bought it from, he knew me, and he gave me a private mortgage. But he owed the people that he bought it from, the Courtneys, and they knew me, and they gave me a second private mortgage. So I had two mortgages.
And two good neighbors.
But, you know, I don't think people do that anymore. So
Yeah.
that's the only way I was able to buy my house. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Elaine Jones?
I spent a lot of time at Lazy Point growing up. I've lived in Amagansett for 76 years. I was born next door to the house where I live now, and I had a lot of friends in Lazy Point, and my children had a lot of friends in Lazy Point. But there's only one person who I wish was here tonight, and that person would be Stuart Thorple. He studied the Donegan patent for years. In 1648, the Indian sachems of 4 Long Island tribes sold the Lazy Point land to the inhabitants of East Hampton Town. And that means inhabitants. You don't own the trustee land. The inhabitants of East Hampton own it. I've supported the Lazy Point people, and I believe that I've talked to a woman today who has a house down there, and she said she does not support. She said I could give her name, but I'm not going to. She can write a letter. She said she doesn't support this because we're giving it to the rich people who can pay cash to buy it. As far as a mortgage, has anybody on this board gone to a bank? Have you gone to a bank to decide if you can get a mortgage?
Actually, we have done that, yes.
You have done that. Which
Yes.
bank did you go to?
Rick, Chris?
Which bank?
We approached Far East Mortgage to take a look at this and see if it was an option. But just so everybody here understands, there's no guarantees that anybody's going to be able to get a mortgage. We're not making any representations that you're going to be able to go and get a mortgage. We're simply providing that opportunity that it's possible they can go to a local bank and get a mortgage on this 35-year lease, modeled after some other townships in Long Island that have done so.
Okay, well, I talked to 2 banks today, and one was Chase Private Client, and a woman gave me her name, and she will meet with you on April 15th. And the Chase Bank will not give them a mortgage for 35 years if you don't own the property. And another bank that I spoke with wants a 40-year mortgage, or else they won't give a loan. I think that what this board has done, and I don't care about past elections, this board has done is you're giving our land away. We cannot give, I believe, 5 years, 10 years, but not 35. You're giving it away. They'll be able to get, I don't know if they will be able to get mortgages, and I don't know who wrote this recent lease for this property.
Our attorney.
Who?
Our attorney.
Mr. Cirillo wrote it?
Carrillo, yes.
Carrillo wrote it, okay. I support the people of Lazy Point, but not for 35-year mortgages. And this hasn't been brought up recently. In 2 months, after almost 300 years, in 2 months, members of this board have rewritten the lease to give Lazy Point away to only those who can afford it. And I'm sorry, but that's how some of the people who don't support this feel. To build McMansions, have you checked? Can Lazy Point people get flood insurance?
Elaine, the situation in terms of the ownership of the property
The
does
ownership?
not change. It's still,
I
it's still
understand
in the
that. It doesn't
trustees,
change, and I don't want
okay?
it to change.
And
But can the
every-
people of Lazy Point get flood insurance?
If they become FEMA compliant, yes, they can.
There are so many questions that you cannot really expect to do this tonight after all a year.
But
From
I
a
just-
year to 35 years, I
Elaine,
don't think so.
I just answered that question.
What?
If you bring the property into FEMA compliance, yes, you can.
All right. But there's still a lot of questions. If you bring it into, and how do you bring it into FEMA compliance? There's
The
all
way it goes into FEMA compliance, and this is one of the dilemmas, and Elaine, I'm glad you brought this up, because one of the things that did trigger the dialogue here is we had a property that sold within the last 2 years, okay? The new owner of the house, because they don't own the property, came to us and said, listen, we'd like to do the following renovations. Now, keep in mind, the comment that was just made about McMansions, first and foremost, okay, you see, everybody that lives in Lazy Point, you know how big your property is. Everybody that lives in Lazy Point also knows that between the building department and the trustees, we haven't issued permits for expansions on these houses in ages. Not since I've been on the board. I know people over the years did get permits to do expansions on these things, but that has been a thing of the past. There's not going to be any new construction or new building, but just to bring everybody in the audience up to speed, if you apply for a building permit, I'm talking about replacing the windows, replacing the roof, replacing the siding, doing some interior renovations. If you exceed 50% of the value of not the land, the structure, okay, that triggers, this is not the trustees, this is Town of East Hampton. It triggers the need to bring your property into FEMA compliance, okay? What that means is you're going to end up spending more money than you thought you were. Okay, now what if you're somebody that's already got a lease there, and you don't really have the money to do that? Do you give up on your plans to do your renovations? What do you do?
Mr. Grimes, you can get a line of credit for that. If you have the
Absolute-
proper credit and whatever, you don't need to get a 35
Excuse me,
year.
what are you gonna?
Excuse me, I'm speaking.
Okay, but Elaine, can I ask you a
He
question?
said you weren't supposed to ask me questions, so
Okay.
I'm speaking. You can get a line of credit for that. You don't need a 35-year
How?
mortgage to do
How?
it.
What are you gonna
If
secure
you
that
have
with?
I could go to the bank and get a line of credit tomorrow, not a mortgage. I have no mortgages, so I don't need them.
Okay, but what are you gonna use to secure the line of credit?
You're supposed to have the proper credit. Exactly, you have to have the proper. But to fix things, people can, you don't need to get $100,000. The only thing that this looks to me like is that this is so people down in Lazy Point are gonna be able to sell their property, I'm told, for millions of dollars. It does, and listen, if they want to, I hope they do. But it does leave, you're here to protect our Lazy Point.
Excuse me,
This whole
Elaine, I
board.
just want to make a comment, which I thought you were going with, Jim. But as a real estate broker and as a
I don't care
resident
if you're a
of the
real
area.
estate broker. It
let
has
me-
nothing
let
to
me
do with
speak-
Lazy
Let me
Point,
speak, Elaine, to
Susan.
this point. The property is a certain size. We have zoning and planning,
I understand that. but
zoning and
so how do you
planning
get
rules.
huge
So there's no
mortgages?
McMansion that's going to be built on a
So
small
how do you
lot of
get
land.
huge mortgages? Why do you need a 35-year mortgage? when you can get a line of
Well, I was
credit?
addressing the question about McMansions being built,
Well,
but you can't
listen,
build
there are
a very
McMansions
large
all
house on
over
a small
town.
lot of land. We have zoning and planning regulations in the
What
community.
I'm asking you to
protect
do tonight is
the
this
property.
board, this property was sold in 1648 to you to protect, not to give away to anybody,
And
okay?
by protecting the
and
land,
the
we're also
reason-
protecting the community and our neighbors who live in those houses.
I support
East
these
Hampton is
people.
supporting, East Hampton,
It's 3 minutes. It's 3 minutes,
Then I just
wanna say,
Susan.
you know,
That's it on the time.
35-year
Okay,
mortgages,
time.
you're giving it
Your
away.
time is up, Elaine.
You're
Okay,
giving
thank
it
you.
away. And
I
you
can't
should
give
have
a-
more respect for the people of East Hampton. All right, I'm done.
Okay, Diane McNally?
No.
Hi, Diane.
Hi, good evening, Diane McNally, former town trustee. Gosh, lots I'd like to try to get said in a very short time. First of all, I was party to what Mr. Grimes referred to as the crisis of 4 years ago. I see a lot of faces out here, people that I know, people that will still smile and wave and say hey to me out on the streets, which I do appreciate. But I do think that crisis was instigated by a lot of misrepresentations, misunderstandings, false statements. It was a fiasco during a campaign, and it really, really ruined relationships for a lot of people. So I'm sorry about that, but I am here tonight to speak specifically as a trustee for what it is you're trying to do here. But the other thing I did want to comment, and I'm going to apologize in advance in case this is an invasion of some privacy, but, Mr. Drew, are you still married to one of our Lazy Point leaseholders?
Yes.
Yes. As such, you have a financial interest in the outcome of this discussion. I would like you to publicly recuse yourself from any discussion or vote on this topic.
I've done that before when this was
Okay.
being brought up, but I'd be happy to do it tonight. My wife
Yes.
Susan is a leaseholder, and I am recusing myself
Okay.
from any discussions or input or vote
All right.
on this matter.
I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane.
Okay. So, as a trustee during my tenure, we had a gentleman around 3 Mile Harbor who had been issued a 10-year permit for some shoreline stabilization project. It involves some type of a meshy plastic in the dune. Board turns over, which we know, which is also part of the problem with the one-year lease, et cetera, et cetera. 10 years later, property wants to exchange hands, there's new trustees here. Who remembers there's a permit out there? Nobody. It leads to more conflict. Clearwater Beach and Lionhead, each lawsuit with the town trustees, that's settled. They're giving a 10-year lease for the marinas at their 2 associations. 10 years later, what happens? New trustees, new board members down there, nobody remembers what happened, almost winds up with another lawsuit. Another question. Are you aware that you have leases with the Nature Conservancy in East Hampton Town? You are. Okay, do you know where they are? One of you is shaking your head, yes. Yeah, anyway. Back in 1984-85, Democratic Board leased for 99 years. Parcel of land around East Hampton, Nat Peak, 3 Mile Harbor, to protect the endangered flora and fauna, because we did not have the town resources at the time to do that ourselves. Less than 99 years later, we've got a natural resources department, we've got plenty of knowledge and whatever. It's time. There is
I'm the
time.
timekeeper. Who said that?
Somebody out there.
No.
Okay.
Please continue.
Thank you, yeah. Anyway, these are the situations with the board. Being an, every other year an elected body, which is another issue that could be addressed at another time. Every other permit, and including the lease right now, everything is done on an annual basis so that you, as the governmental entity, the people in charge of your properties, have an opportunity to touch base with those who are utilizing those resources. Docks, duck blinds, moorings, leases, just everything that you do, just so it doesn't get lost. So I would just encourage you to keep that in mind. I know the residents are looking for security. I know, that whatever's been done in the past, whether it was to remove the lottery system, or whether to allow for the subletting of the properties, or any other amendment that we've made over the years, it hasn't done the trick yet. But this particular thought process, 35 years, is going to turn into a nightmare. I think all you're doing is kicking the can down the road 35 years. Because if you want, anyway, do I have to stop?
That's time.
It's
Yeah.
time? Okay, maybe I'll have another chance to come back?
Write a letter.
You may very well.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane.
Okay, Rick Whalen?
Good evening, members of the trustees. Rick Whalen. I am speaking as a resident of East Hampton and a resident of Amagansett. I live on Town Lane in Amagansett. I do not represent anyone in connection with this, and I have, my comments are, basically my opinion. I think, to me, Lazy Point is one of the unique communities in East Hampton Town. It is, you won't find it anywhere else. I don't want to say anywhere else on the east end of Long Island. I can't speak for every other town on the east end, but certainly nowhere else in East Hampton are you going to find a community of this kind. It's quaint, it's small, it's homey, at least for a long time. It has had mostly real local residents, even today, even though you might need some more money to get in there. You have to be a local resident of East Hampton to be there in the first place. So it's got a unique character and a unique quality, which I would personally hate to see us lose. And I think, the back of my mind is the feeling that people who are not in favor of extending these leases have in the back of their mind the notion that, well, maybe at some point, if everyone's in a one-year lease, we can wrap this up and, you know, eventually end all the leases and move everybody out. And I think that would be tragic. The Lazy Point community, I'm not sure how people, I think the, Jim Grimes actually mentioned, the trustees have been giving leases there for 70 years. Lazy Point as a community now is over 100 years old. I don't think anyone knows exactly when it was formed or founded, but the earliest evidence of it is in the Belcher Hyde Atlas of 1916. Belcher Hyde did atlases for all of Suffolk County, and when they got to the Napeague area in 1916, they included Lazy Point, and they show at that time 29 individual homes, occupied homes, in 1916. In 1935, the trustees did their own survey of the property, and there were 35 homes at that time. This is a community with long-standing in the town of East Hampton. Obviously, it was founded by people who did not have, you know, great financial means. They did not have title to their land, so the homes were very modest. They were very small, and that today adds to its character, adds to the quaintness of the place. And it's obviously from the comments tonight, the trustees are not about to go and allow, you know, mega mansions to be built down there. So I'm in support of the trustees' proposal to allow for long-term leases to be 35 years. I haven't done the research that you guys have done, but 35 years sounds to be pretty reasonable. You certainly can understand why people who are buying and selling and living in homes do not want their house to be on a lot on which they have a one-year lease dependent on the whims of a government body. Who the heck would want that? So I think a 35-year lease to me is reasonable. The lease rates sound reasonable to me as well. The people that are down there are paying taxes to the town of East Hampton on the improvements on the property. And let's not forget that when they do sell their property, they're subject to a 4% transfer tax. Normal properties within the town of East Hampton, you know, the CPF tax is a 2% transfer tax. If you sell a unit at Lazy Point, between the buyer and the seller, they're paying 4% of the value in transfer. And I think that certainly mitigates any concern that the annual lease payments are too short. Also, 35 years is only good, as Mr. Grimes has said, if you're actually the owner for the entire time. If you go sell it or even transfer to a family member within that 35 time period, the lease is going to be renewed, and the trustees will at that time be able to you know, reevaluate whether or not the lease payment is accurate. So I just want to say I'm in support of what you're proposing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Pam Keane? Pam Keane?
Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Pam Keane, and I was fortunate enough to purchase a home in Lazy Point 3 years ago. This June will be my 3rd year anniversary. And just a way of background, my husband grew up here. My parents came out here in the early 1950s and had a 2-bedroom uninsulated house in Maple Lane where they used to smell the fish factory fumes, and I hated it as a kid. But my father used to bring me down to Lazy Point. We used to go clamming and fishing, and I really had a heart for Lazy Point. So when in my adult life I had an opportunity to purchase a home, I certainly wanted the opportunity to seize upon it. We live here in Northwest Woods year-round, but have a 1-bedroom cottage down in Lazy Point. And at the time, the price of the house was somewhat reasonable, but I didn't have that amount of cash in my bank account, so to speak. And so I did approach the banks, and there was no way you could get a mortgage for purchasing that house. So I did work with my financial broker and took out a loan, which I'm paying back. But that's the only way that I could afford to purchase a home there. And I think the people that live there, and I think in that community as well as in a lot of our communities here, it's all very much maintaining a quality of life. And I think whether you live in Springs or other areas in Montauk, I think everyone who's been here for quite some time is working hard to maintain a quality of life. And I think the town trustees have certainly done working very hard to do that for the town and the residents of the town. The woman that spoke of McMansions, I haven't seen that in Lazy Point. I don't know of one McMansion that has been built. And I think the property lot sizes don't allow anyhow for the building of McMansions. I mean, we've gone to just replace extended deck over a concrete deck. And after going to the trustees, the town, the building permits, and it's cost us $4,000 to extend a deck like 3 feet by 9 feet. And we haven't even hired a contractor yet. And we're doing our best to abide by, the laws of the community. And I think what I see happening in Lazy Point and sort of the degradation of the hardworking people that have long lived down there, and I think the community wants to continue the spirit in which the people live down there. There are houses on the water that are selling for $1 million plus. Well, you're finding folks that are literally, who live in Further Lane, have the cash in their pocket to buy a house on the water and use it, a Lazy Point home on the water, as literally their summer cabana. And I don't think that's the community that everyone is looking for. And I think the way the current system is architected, it precludes anybody who's hardworking and has somewhat of a normal job to purchase down there and maintain the existing quality of life. So I'm very much, obviously, I want a one-year lease is ludicrous, and I don't know if 35 is the right number. I can't speak to the number, but I know you can't go to a bank on personal experience and get a loan to purchase a home there. So I think
On a one-year lease?
Excuse me?
On a one-year lease?
On a one-year lease, correct.
And you said that you secured financing. What did you need, what did you need to secure that financing?
Well, I have a financial brokerage with Ameriprise, and basically for lack of a better term, did stuff internally that I could wind up with the cash. But I'm paying off that loans with Ameriprise so that I could secure the money to purchase the home.
So you didn't leverage your house in
Collateral, I was
Northwest?
gonna say collateral of your
I
real estate.
couldn't, no. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
All right, does the board want to hear? Yeah?
Well, I think if the-
Anybody else in the audience want to speak?
That hasn't spoken.
Who hasn't spoken? Is there anyone who wants to finish what they didn't? Okay, Diane.
We're gonna leave the record,
Okay, thank you.
Talk about that.
And if my mom and dad can't believe I'm up here talking so much because I was so quiet as a kid. Anyway, whether you go for the lease, whatever, that's one issue. I'm going to now comment on the actual document that I had an opportunity to read, beginning with your resolution. And I'm just going to run through these really quick. Starting in your fourth whereas, it says the trustees wish to afford East Hampton Town residents the opportunity to purchase a lease lot by obtaining a mortgage. So if you're not going to be selling that land, that needs to be clarified. Going down to the next whereas, it's,
Wait a minute, Diane, where is that one?
Here,
That's a
that's
pretty
in a
important-
resolution. 1, 2, 3, 4. Fourth whereas down.
We have two separate,
I need
so give us a moment.
No, she's correct.
This is,
No, he
this
has to
was,
find it. He
this
must
was
have found it.
inserted in
I have
the
it.
last
I have mine.
lease agreement that was drafted. It wasn't in the prior two.
Okay, I'm just
This
looking
was
at
inserted in the last one.
on the draft.
On the last draft that we
It's-
got,
Right,
That-
it says
Marked
draft.
draft, so
Right, yeah, it's
There-
draft.
there's-
I know
there's
what
time
you're
for
saying.
correcting.
Right, right,
And
it's
I
all
appreciate
draft,
that.
but we're
Trustees
just
wish to
pointing it out to you, that that's what it
appreciate that.
says, and that can be a problem in the future.
yes.
Going down, the second to the last whereas, the parties have agreed upon fair and adequate consideration for the extended term. That you might want to make your public aware of whatever, if there are any other considerations that have been extended by either party for the extended lease. And then in the now therefore and for other good and valuable consideration. I know these are atypical phrases for contracts, whatever, but when it comes to the trustees being a governmental entity, it's an appearance of impropriety, and you might want to check that out. Then we go down into your renewal and restatement, paragraph 2. We're just, let me go to my notes over here. You're stating that the trustees can't amend the terms of this lease until the term is up. That means you can't amend the lease for 35 years.
Correct.
But you want the intent to be known to the tenants and others, the future boards have the unqualified right to amend any and all terms of the lease. But that's after 35 years. The rules and regs, you're giving yourself an opportunity to amend upon mutual agreement with your tenants. You might want to rethink that. I mean, over the course of 35 years, I don't know. If they're going to have the mortgage, I don't know. Paragraph 4 in here addresses taxes. It says the tenant will be responsible for taxes assessed upon the lot. And as we noted earlier, right now, the land is not taxed. The houses are. So, again, that's just a question that needs to be addressed. In your paragraph 6, you are giving your tenant the right to terminate the lease, but you're not giving yourselves the right to terminate lease. Only if the rules and regs are broken are you giving yourself any authority. I do like your paragraph 7 and 8 where it talks about the renovation and repair or the loss of the property. I mean, that's exactly what we've been seeing over the last decade or so with the homes that are getting damaged due to storms, et cetera. Whether it's to raise the house, fix the house, lift the house, whatever. Those are all trustee decisions. They should not be FEMA decisions or town decisions. I mean, I know they need all those permits, but that's a trustee decision on whether that should be allowed or not, and you've left yourself that opportunity, so kudos. I like that.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's 4 minutes.
Okay, Diane,
Yeah.
just about out of time.
I'm just about out of time. Okay, so anyway, going through this, I would just say, and I will try, if I have time to get it down in writing for you, I certainly will. And that goes, I would just say that when it comes to the environmental certificate and the rules and regs, I could pick out a few things from memory that I knew had been amended or changed, but if, for the public's clarification, that the document be put forth to us in such a way that anything that's to be eliminated is striked or underlined, and anything to be added is somehow noted in another fashion, so that when you read them, you know what's coming out and what's going in.
Okay.
And I thank you very much for the second opportunity to speak tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Elaine?
I have something for you. This is the lady that I spoke with today. Her name is Monica Whalen. She's with Chase Private Client. She's a senior home lending advisor, and she said she would meet with anybody on April 15th.
Okay,
Thanks.
Elaine, as you know, I work in the affordable housing
I know.
department. The town has 99-year leases, and
I
most of these large banks will not give loans to those properties either.
No.
And those are 99-year leases, but there are banks that will.
But they can get lines of credit much easily, I was told. They can get lines of credit. They can get lines of credit. They don't need hundreds of thousands.
Excuse me, Elaine, when you have a line of credit, that line of credit is not secured by your good looks, okay? That line of credit is secured by an asset
By my
that you
home. By
own.
my
Okay,
home.
but Elaine, in the case of the people that are full-time year-round residents that do not have a house in Amagansett or do not have a house somewhere else, there is no asset to secure that line of
I thought
credit.
Lazy Point was you were supposed to own another home in East Hampton Town years ago.
Well, you had to be a resident.
You had to be a resident not with a home? You didn't have to own another
You had to be a resident for what, 2 years it was?
Did you need to own a home or?
Well, the only way, Elaine, the only way people have been able to buy these things is because they had an asset. They either had cash in their pocket or they had an asset somewhere else that they could leverage or take a line of credit out.
Jimmy,
to
all
get
the
that money.
people that I know who have houses in Lazy Point own other homes.
I was just gonna say, there are people that do not own.
But they do. Years ago, that's how it was. You had to own another home. But I don't think, listen, I'm not against a longer lease than 1 year.
Yeah.
I'm against a lease for 35 years. 5 or 10 years would be wonderful. You should
what happened
investigate.
is, Elaine, that 5 or 10 years wouldn't give the ability to finance,
You
okay?
can't fix your home in 10 years?
No, no,
Line of
you
credit?
couldn't, you can't get a line of credit if you don't have an asset to secure that line with or cash to secure it with.
Well, you know what, I don't buy anything unless I know I can afford to do it.
We'll call you for a loan.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Anybody else?
but they say something nice.
Okay. Okay, since we've heard from everybody, we'll conclude the hearing for tonight.
I'm ready to make a motion.
When do we want? do
I
we want-
would like to make a motion at this time to keep the record open for 10 days from today.
I'll second your motion.
What's the date, what's that date?
10 days, it's the 8th today, so
It would be the 12th, I believe?
No,
I mean,
I think it's the 19th, just
10 days.
Actually, it's 19.
the 19th, yeah.
It'd be the 19th. Can't include today.
okay.
Today's
19th
pretty,
is next
Well,
Friday.
the
today's
Friday.
kind of shot.
Well, this, you know what this does? This gives anybody that has comments to get them in time so that they
For the
can
next
come to
meeting.
us for the next meeting, so
Yeah.
that we're not having an 11th
19th is
hour.
a Friday.
That's perfect.
Okay.
Okay.
The 10 days is the 18th, which is Thursday.
That's Friday before.
It's starting tomorrow.
Yeah.
right?
So we're going to keep it open to the 18th.
Correct.
To the 18th?
Okay, but just keep in mind, guys, 10 days is actually the 19th.
Okay.
So
Has
Friday
everyone
the 19th?
voted now?
Thursday.
Friday the
Friday
19th.
19th.
Fine.
All right.
That sounds fair.
Okay, so.
Do I have a second on that?
Yes.
I'll second that.
Susan
All in favor?
seconded. Aye. I think for purposes of these votes, if we can get a roll call vote, I think that's
Yeah.
important.
All right.
Yep.
Want a roll call now? John?
Roll call?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Rick's not recused. Jim?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Francis, can I just make one recommendation?
Flip
Could involve banks.
We're in the
Wait,
middle
wait,
of.
We're gonna vote.
Wait, Reg.
We closed the
No.
comment session. Sorry, Reg.
We're in the middle of a roll call. Go ahead, Bill.
I said yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, okay. So we'll keep comments open until the 19th.
Correct.
Anybody who wants to comment should send it in writing to our office. What else we gotta do here? We're leaving the hearing open for comment until the 19th. Written comments to the trustee board on Bluff Road.
Okay, and we will expect a vote on this at our next meeting?
Which is
We can expect to.
22nd?
Yeah.
Is it the 20? Be the
The next meeting's the
22nd.
22nd. Okay. Thank you, everybody, who, yeah.
Question. If, as a result of this hearing, or the comments that are gonna close the Friday before
A
the...
little louder, John. I can't hear you.
If as a result of the comments that have been made tonight, or the comments that may come in the Friday before our next meeting,
Mhm.
will that give us enough time to consider the comments and make any changes to the lease by the next meeting, by voting at the...
What about the
think so.
changes already? Didn't we point out a couple?
Yeah, those can be, yeah, but that's stuff that can be turned around.
I'll make
Rather
myself
quickly.
available to everybody as I have been from the beginning, and if we want to get it done in time for the 19th, we can do that. I'm going to make some changes already off this, and I'll get the drafts out to you as soon as I can.
Okay.
Well, as these comments come in, they're available to all the board members. I encourage you to look at them, consider them. We'll discuss them at the next meeting before we vote. Okay?
We have to close the meeting?
We're going to close the hearing for tonight. Okay?
Make a motion.
Do I have a motion to close the hearing for tonight?
I make
I'll make
a
a
motion.
Do I have a second?
I'll-
All in
I
favor?
will second it.
Aye.
All right.
All right. So we'll move on.
Get home safe, everybody.
Thanks, everybody,
Thank
for
you.
coming.
All right, let's give them a few minutes to leave the room.
Do we have a second? Are we taking a break for a minute?
You can, yeah. We're gonna let them clear the room.
Jump out for a second?
Over to Arlene. I'm trying not to.
It's way over there. Can you put this on Arlene's desk?
we're gonna
Let's get back to the meeting.
open up the meeting again. Just waiting to get the okay from LTV.
New voice. Hey, Vince McMahon.
I'm having a ball.
Oh.
Okay, we're on. We're
Okay,
back.
all right.
Chris Yolen might be here to speak about the art barge, possibly.
I'm sorry?
The art barge?
Okay, well, we're gonna get to this, we can wait until we get to that point, right? Can you wait? Okay. All right, move on to new business. Napeag Lazy Point, we have a request from Ms. Stadler to rent her home located at Lot 29S at Lazy Point.
And this is a home that's been rented in the past, and it looks like it's the
Right.
same tenant and everything.
I would make a motion that we accept it, providing that all the paperwork is in order, and is it?
Yes, it's a renewal, and she has her affidavit
I'll
of
second
domicile.
that.
Yep, thank you.
Proof of residency.
It's okay with Arlene?
This is
Okay with me.
Okay, so this is an ongoing,
Yeah.
okay.
Great.
So,
Second, all in favor?
You have
Aye.
a
Aye.
point?
Okay, I'm sorry?
No, I'm not
Were
sure.
you seconding it, Susan?
Oh, no, I was
She was
raising
just being
my hand
really
to second
polite,
it,
and
but
I
he-
wasn't.
He jumped it.
Okay.
Jim?
I made the motion,
He made the
Jim
motion, Jim
seconded.
seconded.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
Is it unanimous?
let's take a breath and get organized here.
I'm recusing myself from the vote.
Okay.
All right.
So we vote, everybody?
Yes.
Okay.
All in favor?
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
All right. We have a request from Ms. McMahon to rent her home located at 16S, Lot 16S in Lazy Point.
All the papers in order for her as well?
It's also a renewal, and all the papers are
Renewal?
in there. Yeah,
Okay.
these are
All right.
renewal leases.
So I'll make a motion to permit Ms. McMahon to rent her home.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right, old business. Napeag Lazy Point, proposed local historic designation for the art barge and the D'Amico Studio and Archive. Would you like to speak?
If you just have questions,
Oh.
any type of questions about, I saw the
Can you come to the podium, please? Thank you.
I'm Christopher Cohan, President of the Board, Victor D'Amico Institute of Art. And when the proposal came in last time, I was unaware that it was here at the meeting, but I saw the, the television meeting. and-
Chris, do you want to take the pen out of your head?
Why?
Why?
Was that a pen?
It's a pen, yeah, sorry.
I meant it as a joke.
Okay.
Maybe you weren't aware that it looked like the pen was going into your
it's-
head.
It happens.
I hear you, no problem.
Sorry. But you had a question that also you were concerned that school buses would be,
Yeah.
coming in, and they will be, to go counter to what you thought, or what I think someone in the audience was mentioning, if there would be any kind of a problem with cars coming up and down the road. And you said you were concerned about school buses, and there have been school buses coming and going, and I think that's also the case, that there will be even, more of them possibly, but seeing that the shoulders on all those house lots I keep them cut and they're rather wide, we don't have any kind of problem that way. They can turn around in my driveway to also not drive through the whole little downtown of Lazy Point, as I like to joke with it, so that they come around the Lazy Point Road, not the Shore Road.
Didn't buses used to go down that all the time for summer camp and?
Well, there's also a school bus, there's some children down there, 7:35 every morning, a school
Yeah.
bus is going down. So
Sure.
but just cars in general also, and when we do have any kind of a larger gathering of people, we do go for mass gathering permits, so.
Let me put it this way, if I may, Chris, okay? And I do trust your judgment, but it's a narrow road.
Absolutely.
So now if we have school buses and then fire trucks.
Correct.
We have an emergency.
Correct.
But if you can keep them upland, that's fine.
But Brian, typically, let me suggest this. If you've got a bus load of kids or something there, the bus driver doesn't necessarily need to participate in the tour. They could park down at the launching ramp or
That's right.
somewhere else.
That sounds
Come
good.
back and
Sure.
get the kids.
Yeah,
Sure, no,
Okay.
no, they do that also.
And I think that's,
Exactly.
That would
that's one
work.
of those things that,
Right.
that
And
common
there's,
sense.
as I said, there's room there for them to do a three-point and turn around so that when they come down Lazy Point Road, you know, they're facing then, they come to the property facing west. There's land enough there for them to turn around, so they leave
They don't have-
facing east, you know, also, and they can then go back to the launching ramp or into the driveway or so. So that's not an issue.
Okay. But you're aware of the fact of congestion and you're dealing with it.
Excuse me?
You say you're aware of the potential for congestion and you're dealing with it, right?
Oh, yeah, no,
Yeah.
very much. No, I'm very concerned. I mean, I'm always trying to think about everything. Every detail has to be, you know, thought out, because it is public, and there's also people involved, and I take things a little too personally, but it's better to do that than, you know, have any other kind of an issue, definitely.
For me, it was only a thought. I
Sure.
wasn't
Yeah.
driving anything home, I just,
Sure.
and it sounds like you're on top of it, so it's
But,
good.
you know, also, there could be the possibility of, you know, the leases, and the D'Amico does have 3 house lots and leases, and now for the future, and my name is also on those lease, and now for the future, I'd also like to possibly have a dialogue with Lazy Point committee people or the rest of the board about the day when I'm no longer on those leases, and how does that revert to either the institution solely, or possibly back to the trustees, or, you know, not to create another issue, but that's going to eventually happen. Most likely a legal issue also. But I think that can be a concern at some point.
Would that likely transfer to a new director on the same terms that your employees?
Well, it could, but there aren't any terms. That's just
Well,
it.
that's, I
Yeah,
think,
there aren't any
probably
terms.
would be good, you know, if you had some sort of like a custodial thing, where there's an individual that is a name, you know, that is a real
Right,
entity that
right.
has a name that takes residence.
Right.
Yeah, so-
That's possible, right. Or to have a liaison, a trustee liaison on our board might be
That's an interesting
a
idea.
way of, you
And a
know,
good
just
one.
being in check with things, definitely. Because this is something long-term is how I look at it. You know, the historic designation will, you know, preserve the properties, and we have the little guest house is an original little Montauk Fishing Village house and an original Lazy Point
Oh, really?
house. Yeah.
Do you know which house
It
it
was
was?
owned by the Jenkins, is what I was told. And it was moved there from Fort Pond Bay by a boat right after
Yeah.
the 38 hurricane. We have panes of window that are
So
sandblasted.
I've got like the old 1916 map of the fishing
possible,
village.
sure,
And
yeah.
it shows where everybody's lease site was,
see if
very
there's
much
one
like Lazy Point.
See if that house is listed. It won't be, I don't think it would be listed in 1916, but someone talked about 1935. There was a trustee map then. And I was told it was brought there in 39.
Chris, I got a map, I've got a photograph from the air of 1930 of the front of Fort Pond Bay with all the houses,
Yeah.
very clear.
Well, it's that little house that we want to restore, but I want to restore it to a Lazy Point type of a house, so that if the lease is ever broken, we can still lift it up and move it off the property, in a sense, and not restore it with a foundation or a crawl space or anything like that.
We'll look at this one together, because I just realized nobody's ever seen it. I've kept it private, so.
Great. So,
If- if-
We sent this letter in, right? The letter of support?
No, not yet, that's
Not
what
yet?
we're voting on.
Okay, just,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Anybody else have questions, Chris?
I don't.
No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
all right, thanks.
Do we want to deal with that now? The letter?
Yeah. Yeah, so what we have in front of us is that letter of support that was requested by the town board for the historic designation.
I thought that was a great letter, very thorough. It addressed all the concerns that we had raised.
Does anybody want to make a motion to
Make a
approve it?
motion.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
So,
Good letter.
have we done it?
All right, moving on to committee reports. 29 Springwood Way, staircase application, Suffolk County Tax Map 300-74-7-26.1.
This is an application that we talked about last
Seen it
July.
before.
We tabled it until the applicant receives his ZBA and DEC permits, which he did, and notified us the end of January that he had, and there was a bit of a delay in getting it to the committee. So I took a look at it, spoke to Bill about it and Brian about it. It's, you know, there's a bluff there, and he's actually accessing the beach now with a ladder. It's a very steep bluff, not very high, but very, very steep. And I would recommend that we approve this trustee permit with the recommendation that he hinge the bottom of the stairs so that they can be folded back up when they're not in use, especially in the winter when ice or storm tides might.
Is there anybody here representing the applicant on this? You want to say, do you want to say something about this, Bill?
Yeah. Okay. So, I like the part about the bottom being hinged to allow, as you said, in the wintertime for it to, you know, to come up. And I'd love to give the person some relief from the ladder that they're using. All joking aside, I would make a motion to accept this application, providing that it meets all our requirements, and it sounds like it's going to.
Bill, is that, it looks like a pretty significant run on the stairs there. You're not talking about having the whole stair flip up, just the
No.
last 10 feet or 8 feet.
Yeah, it wasn't really designed, incorporated into the design yet, so I'm not sure how it's
So
going to
you're
work.
gonna do that with a landing?
So they could flip, I'm not sure yet. I mean, we haven't, John mentioned it at, just a few days ago. I was thinking the last few feet of the steps would be flipped up. That's how I kind of envisioned it, either removable
Do
or
it out of-
flipped up.
Do it out of aluminum, the last bit.
Yeah. They were talking about using metal for it, so metal and composite, just anything untreated.
So Bill, is there a path that then goes to the stairs, and then the stairs are the last section? Am I reading this correctly?
Path? Well, it's all, yeah.
Proposed 4-foot path.
Yeah, it's all vegetation right now, so there's basically like a mowed path.
Right, but is that gonna maintain as a path, or is that gonna be a structure in that upper area?
No, it's just an unimproved
Path.
path.
And then downwards, it shows the stairs, that's the structural stair.
Correct.
Thank you.
Sure.
And I'd like to phrase it in the permit as a recommendation, because if we made it a requirement technically, and this might not be too onerous for the applicant, but it might, technically the other two permits that he's already gotten.
Would require a modification.
A couple of months ago, may require a modification. So I didn't want to impose that on.
We're going to do our best to try to.
We have a motion on the,
Yeah, I'll
Matter?
second the motion.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
All right, administrative payment of the bills. Optimum, $85.95. Vistry and Materials, Inc., for the opening of Acabonic Culvert, $26,300.
Make a motion to pay the bills?
I'll second that. Can I make one comment on this for next year?
Yep.
Okay,
Goes
we've
to
been,
bidding?
yes, we've been doing this the way we did it because we wanted to be expedient and we wanted to get it open this year. We have the permit, it's in play. Next year, there's plenty of time to set up a bid on this. And just adjust the numbers so that we're all confident that these are good, accurate numbers.
You want to make a motion to do that then? For
Sure,
the future? And I'll second it?
all right,
That we put it out to bid for next year?
yes.
We never know what's gonna happen.
Can I, go back
All
to
in
just
fa-
one
well-
thing. I just wanted to say, this is going back to Napeag Lazy Point. Someone mentioned tonight that it was a new discussion.
Well,
Oh, I'm
here's,
sorry.
here's the
Excuse
thing,
me.
you're making a motion
Sorry.
to go to bid, but depending on when you do this, there may be a different board here, and I don't think you can make a decision for a future
Oh.
board.
Oh.
Non-binding? Okay,
Okay.
so we're gonna
So-
table that.
Okay.
It's a good recommendation.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I think we're all in agreement
Okay.
that that's the way it should be handled from now on.
Okay, if you
I
wanna
just
do
have a
that,
little
that's
peanut
okay.
gallery item here. I just wanted to bring to the board's attention that someone had mentioned that Lazy Point was a new issue, and you had mentioned it had been on, under discussion for a long time. Last year, in my first year as a trustee, on May 14th, it was on the Napeag Lazy Point to discuss extending the length of, and so it's almost a full year, and we haven't discussed it since. you know,
Well,
just
we've had
recently.
committee
It's been
discussions.
Right, but it hasn't
Yeah.
been out in the board, we
Yeah.
never resolved it. so-
hearing on the agenda,
This is from May 14th agenda.
right?
I just happened to have it, and I saw that it was Lazy Point, so in the last year, this has been
Yeah,
going on.
this has come up,
and
this has been on
discussed.
our
This has come
agenda
up
several
for
years.
I know, but I'm saying,
Years
someone
and
tonight
years.
said it hadn't come up. It
No,
was,
it's been-
so I just wanted to.
It's been under consideration and brought up at discussions. The whole, battle about the rents brought all this out. It was discussed at length during those
Yeah.
public hearings and conversations. And it's finally just come around to where
So,
we've had a public
someone I just
hearing.
ran into said that years ago, there was a 100-year lease for the residences.
99.
99-year lease, yes, so I thought that was very interesting to look that up, and then it was reversed back to a 1-year lease, so.
Oh, no, I was talking the town,
The
right
90.
now in the town's affordable
No,
housing program.
somebody downstairs.
No, they had 5-year leases at one point.
Okay, a
Yeah.
woman downstairs, her family owned a property that they
Okay.
bought from somebody, and she said it was, at that time, back in the 60s, 99 years.
No,
That
that
was-
was,
I'm aware of.
Okay, so
some-
maybe
yeah.
she's mistaken.
Well, the affordable housing things have 99-year leases.
Yes, I know that, affordable housing, 99.
All
that
right,
was the case, we wouldn't have been talking about this tonight.
all right, we have the minutes
No,
from,
but she said it went reverted, sorry, go ahead, Francis, I'm
well, I
sorry.
don't think you could do that.
No.
A lease is the binding,
Well, see how
agreement.
rumors start?
yeah. Minutes, February 25th, anybody have a chance to
I'm
look
going
at
to go
them?
home and read
No.
them. They were just put in
I
our
just got that this
thing.
afternoon.
Do I have a motion to table?
Make a mo-
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and financials, March 31st. Anybody?
They appear to be in order. I did look at
Did you?
them, and I would make a motion without objection to accept them as written.
I'll second it.
That's all I need.
All in
Okay.
favor?
I'm sorry, John Aldred, I didn't get to put on the agenda the issue at the kayak racks that we're having.
I was gonna just
If,
throw that out.
if we could talk about it, yeah.
All right, well, we're doing
Oh, it's real quick.
financials right now.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so I heard a couple of ayes.
Oh, aye.
Aye,
Okay, thank you.
Aye.
All right, anybody have anything else?
Yes,
Yes,
John?
kayaks.
someone came into the office the other day, I happened to be there, and she said that poison ivy is starting to invade into the kayak racks and Last Point, and she's concerned about kids and people getting poison ivy. I went down there and took a look at it the other day, I have some pictures if you wanna see them,
I
and
know, poison ivy looks
I
like.
know what it looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we need to look at the pictures,
Oh,
but our secretary actually had offered to go down there and hand pull that poison ivy. And I would like to make a motion that we approve that,
Table
as
that
long as it
until
doesn't
winter.
exceed $200. Because that was the figure we discussed.
Guess I'll have
I
to
mean,
keep the poison
what can we
ivy.
do?
Well,
Move the
well,
racks?
Well, you could move the rear rack
No.
forward of the forward rack. There seems to be enough beach there. Seems like, the rack is acting almost like a snow factory. Maybe the kayaks being there and dampening the wind, and there's the dunes sort of growing. Goes to
I say let the ivy
poison
win, move the
mixed
rack.
in is all kind of, under the back of the racks. You could take the rear and move it to the front, and be on beach again.
Is there any other maintenance work we gotta do on the road?
How wide is the beach in
No,
front
we
of
just
it?
replaced those racks a
Yeah.
year
I
ago.
was, well, I got pictures if you wanna see them.
Let's see the
This-
pictures.
Jim,
Took
what
the
do you
time to
think?
take the
Does it make
pictures?
By
more
the way,
sense
I mean, you can
Feed it
shift the
back?
thing forward. They were there, that's where they were originally. And I thought the goal here was to try and keep these things sort of
Yeah.
reasonably as far away from the water as we could.
Yeah.
Well,
Because
and-
that was one of the complaints that we actually received when we added a rack last year, was somebody complained that they couldn't put their,
So this is looking from, this is from south to north. This is the southernmost rack. Not so bad. This is the next set. This is pretty bad. This is, especially this one. It's kind of a close-up of how it's invading in underneath. You can see the sand is elevated there, and that's the last one. So that kind of gives you an idea of the beach. It's a mid-tide.
So you're proposing putting one rack in front of the other?
Take this
No, just
rack,
shifting the
move
back
it
rear
down
leg
here,
forward.
take the rear and
Just
move
move
it
it forward.
You don't, might not have to do them all. Like, this isn't so bad. This is mostly beaches.
Mm-hmm.
But the,
might be the simplest solution.
I mean, people settle on that beach though, too, so.
You gotta be careful how far you
Right.
push it.
it-
Hey,
it's a
John, it
popular
might be,
family
if
area.
it's a case where you think it's gonna impinge on the beach, just shift it forward and move both sets of posts. It's not gonna be that big a deal to do that,
Both halfway or something?
yeah.
This may be a silly question, but is it able to be pulled by hand out, or is
You
it just
can, but you know what
en masse?
is happening there is the ground the sand is accumulating there. It's covered the Rosa rugosa and the beach plum that are there, and the poison ivy's just growing between the stems of the plants there. So it might be just simpler
move
to
it.
just shift, what John's saying, just shift the racks. And if you can't shift them forward 10 feet, well then shift them forward 6 feet, or whatever it is.
Leave this one and then just put that one in front.
Yeah, but you know what, Chris, the ones that are there's one down there, the one beyond that, you got the same situation with, you may only be able to get it halfway, so you may have to just kind of,
Jim, will
Shoot
the
it a
ivy
little
just
bit.
continue growing like kudzu
yeah.
though?
Eventually.
No,
it'll
you know, I
keep
mean, it's
encroaching on
not
the
terribly
racks?
aggressive, but it's, what it is every time somebody fetches their kayak, they're
Right.
getting poison ivy.
But I'm
so-
saying, will that ivy continue growing toward, we move the
Well,
racks and then it grows?
Yeah, probably,
The beach keeps accreting sand.
yeah, and hopefully the beach keeps accreting sand.
I mean, those
Not all
racks have
bad.
been there
It's
probably
troublesome,
10
but it's-
years.
It's not all bad that the beach
And we
is healthy.
dug that
Just wear your
backside out
scuba
last
outfit.
year when we replaced those posts.
Gloves.
It was worse.
Well, we're in the kayak business, we do make money, we have a responsibility.
Yeah, this isn't a
So,
big deal.
The only big
take
deal
care.
is there's kayaks there, and there's probably gonna be more kayaks there as time goes by. And a
So-
lot of them are locked
so-
up. I
so-
don't know how we're gonna,
Yeah, so
we'll have
you
to
can
Oh.
make
remove them.
arrangements.
Are we only moving the one, or are we doing the other one also, the one in the middle?
I think you may have to
Oh, it's the yellow one on the back you
This one
showed us.
definitely needs to be done. This one looks, probably should be done.
Okay.
The
So you're
far
moving,
So-
one-
so-
you're
we-
moving,
We should leave
8
some
posts.
notification on there that one needs to be unlocked. Or, we can just pull
when
it
you
out of
take,
there.
when you take them apart.
Right, it'll come
Doesn't
out.
matter, doesn't
Right,
matter.
good.
When you dismantle it,
yeah, they'll come.
But it'll no
the
longer
kayak
be
will
locked.
come loose.
Maybe we should just,
Should we make a budget?
start
Actually, we
with
can slide,
two or three worst ones.
When you disassemble them, don't worry.
Yeah, yeah,
The
it can-
stuff that's chaining them down isn't chaining them
right,
down.
right. So,
What's that?
Volunteering.
Yes, I am. Actually, you and Arlene, but Arlene's deal is you can't use up any more than $200 worth of time. If you're going over, she's gotta go back to the office.
As long as we're on kayaks today, we had.
is that really how we're doing this? We're doing this with staff?
She put in the lowest bid.
Okay. I mean, I have no problem with
I
it,
would
if
like to
that's what, I
report
just
an
want to know if that's how we're
erstwhile
doing
hot
it.
pink kayak that was found on
Okay.
someone's property today, when I was at Acabonic
Are we
Protection
locating
Committee.
it with this?
The fellow told me, and he took pictures of it, so I looked it up, and I called the person Laura Nelson, I haven't heard from her yet, but her kayak washed ashore on someone else's property.
It's whoever's property it's on.
I'm
The,
sorry?
Maritime law, salvage.
Oh,
the signs were ordered for the kayak racks. I thought they were gonna be done before this meeting, but they hadn't called me. I ordered them from Ocean Graphics. So I'm sure, can't imagine it wouldn't be done by next meeting, but as soon as they get here, do I need to do anything, or can I just go out and put them up? Or do we need
I
to
mean, put them up. How-
just get them up?
Yeah, and we get an invoice, we'll pay it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't know how they're gonna release them to me, but I'm prepared to pay for them.
No, we have a debit card.
Oh, okay.
We'll have her call us, we'll give her the debit card number.
Gotcha.
Or they can just invoice us.
Or they can invoice us. We're not going anywhere.
Okay.
They have new owners, right?
For a while now,
Yeah,
Denise
okay.
sold it.
That's a long
All
time.
right.
Yeah, at least 3 or 4 years.
All right, so, back to these kayak racks. How are we gonna get this work done?
I don't know, last time.
Seriously.
Last time I took care of it. Do you want me to take care of it? Do you wanna do it, John?
I'd be happy to help you, but I can't touch the poison ivy.
I might be out sick with poison ivy for.
I can help you, John, depends on when you wanna do it.
Should we budget
Both
something?
of you guys are up for reelection, so I'll let you take care of it.
Oh,
I can't help myself.
All right,
Always gotta try
we'll
to
work
be
it out.
funny.
All right.
and fair. I think that's fair.
Is there anything else?
You know,
It is fair.
I didn't mean it to be.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Anyone wanna make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to close the meeting.
Right.
Motion to adjourn?
Aye.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
everybody.
Good night.